those of you who are going to be doing special report on crime in Kennesaw, the website here has all of these files. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you. Now, I can get long-winded, so I'm going to try to be very cognizant of time to most definitely allow you guys to ask some questions, but I'll try to cover as much as I can in the few minutes that we have. If you need to stop me for whatever reason, feel free to, and then you can do your edits and such after. Anyway, I'll go ahead and get started. Bill Westenberger, I'm very honored to be here with you guys to talk to you about things within the city limits of Kennesaw, and most specifically within the police department and how we serve the community. I understand you guys had an opportunity just a few minutes ago to meet one of our officers, Officer Luther, who gave you a tour, and I wish I could have been there for that. We should have really had a good time and kind of maybe even had some more time to expand on some things. For those of you that don't know, the city of Kennesaw came into existence back in, I guess, just before the 20th century in 1887. It had some law enforcement initiatives that were going on from time to time, but really the only historical data only goes back to like the 50s with what we had as a police department. So there may have been some semblance of law enforcement specifically to the city government prior to that. We just really don't have a whole lot of data to go back and substantiate that or qualify it. So a lot of our stuff, like I said, go back to the 50s. Some of the things Kennesaw's been most known for is the general chase that happened back during the Civil War. And as many of you may know, if you've not seen or had a chance to go to our museum, I would highly encourage it. Very informative. But the general, which was a train, was actually captured by a group of, I guess, rebels of sort that were trying to carry it back to the north. And it was from a camp that was right there in Kennesaw, right there at the depot area, and early one morning, so that some folks recognized that the train was being stolen and went after it and brought it back. So there was a good bit of historical data with that. The next big thing that Kennesaw is probably known for the most is our gun law, and I will tell you a brief history about that. Back in 1982, a city in Illinois, I think it's Morton Grove, decided to have a ban on guns in their city, and was deemed to be unconstitutional later, but nonetheless, one of the city of Kennesaw at that same time decided to counter that and required all homeowners to have guns. Now, a lot of people I live in Kennesaw and I don't have a gun and all this, that, and the other. Well, there's nothing punitive in that law. It was just more of a statement. So to think that we or any of my officers or staff go and check to see if anybody's got guns, we don't. And if you don't have a gun, you're not in violation of the law. It was pretty much a law that says everybody must have a gun, but if you don't want to have a gun, you don't have to. Unusually though, I guess it was such an unusual law that it has gotten attention back from the 80s all the way through to today, and we still have a lot of, especially folks from other countries that come and visit and want to do stories on our unique gun law. And so it's actually quite intriguing to meet people from other countries and to share experiences with them. We had folks from Denmark that stayed like a week with us, and people from Japan, and a lot of European countries. And Germany's come in and done a couple of stories, French, and I think, I don't know, there's been so many, it's just kind of hard to pinpoint them all, but certainly we've always had a good time with those journalists and end up being somewhat good friends with them. I still got groups of them that I'm friends with on Facebook, and we keep up with each other from time to time. So definitely has given us a lot of opportunity to kind of get to know the world in many, many different ways. So we've been happy with that. Secondary to that, though, and a lot of people associate the two, is our uniquely low crime stats. And we've been very, very blessed, and I say that with a lot of passion about feeling blessed, but we're blessed with extremely low crime rate. And we have had that since, like I said, the 80s that I know of. Let me give you an explanation of what's on the board behind me. This is part of our annual report. Each year we produce an annual report. We're an accredited police agency, and part of that accreditation is to make sure that we're very, very transparent with who we are and what we do. So this is part of the ways we meet that obligation to the community. And this is just one page. I encourage you to go to the city website, and much of the stuff I covered, but in much more detail, is all there. Some of the things you learned today, we were at City Hall, is all there as well. But you can go through that annual report, and you can go back and look at prior years as well. I think I just saw 2012 and 2013 on there, so you can kind of do a little comparison. Some of the verbiage is the same, you know, like the historical data and so on and so forth, really doesn't change much. But our annual reports, as far as, you know, what we've accomplished in that annual year is certainly there. But just to break down the crime statistics for you, this year we had 544 Part 1 crimes, and that's when I say this year, I'm talking 2013. Now that could be adjusted slightly. We send this into the FBI on an annual basis, and they produce what they call the Uniform Crime Reports. It comes out in October. So this may be adjusted slightly, and what we do is we turn in several bits of data. Most importantly, our actual Part 1s, and then they also create a ratio of sort between our Part 1 crimes and what our population is. And then by that ratio, they determine how safe or how unsafe the city may be. So just to kind of break this down, to clarify a little bit, what a Part 1 crime is, they're listed there for you: murder, rape, aggravated assault, robbery, burglary, larceny, which is basically any theft. Then auto theft is rated separately from that. And so what you see there is what we're rated on. For this year, for 2013, like I mentioned earlier, we had 544 that we turned in. Now last year in 2012, you see the number as being slightly lower, but you'll also recognize that that was our lowest number of Part 1 crimes that we've had in almost 10 years. But still, even so, the peak was only at 636, and that was in 09. So we have been very fortunate to see our crime rate continue to be low, even though we've got 33,000 people living in the community now. And I say community, I'm talking about the city limits. I use community a lot because I realize that our department tentacles go farther, much further than our city boundaries. And I recognize our impact goes equally as far. When you take that ratio and you talk about the crime per 100,000 people, you'll see the number up there for 2012 as being 1671. And obviously we do not have this year's yet. We won't have that till the fall. But 1671 Part 1 crimes per 100,000 people, that's extremely low, especially when you look at the national average as being 3,246. So that's something when you start looking at things, you've got to be cognitive of. Now that's a good thing and a bad thing. And you say, well, how could that be bad? Well, it's really awesome that, you know, our community, you feel safe in the community, quality of life is good, schools are good, and all those things. But we still have the need to keep up with what's going on in the community and the challenges. And as Kennesaw grows, you guys have probably heard today, maybe even seen some presentations in the press and such. We've got a lot of developments that as we come out of the economic slowdown, we're challenged with. But you know, economic development is great. It's great for our community. It's great for the city. It pours revenue into the system. However, it also creates challenges, and that's challenges things like calls for service and making sure we have enough staff to keep up with what's going on. So when I go in there and I say, okay, I need some more staff, I need more officers, I need more administrative part, you know, support staff, so on and so forth. You know, one of the quickest things to do or to think about, especially if you're selling this to the city, the community, the citizens are the ultimate supervisor in all of this because they are the taxpayer. So when I'm going to the citizens and I'm saying, hey, I need more people, because ultimately that's what I'm doing, even though it's being approved through the mayor and council and so on and so forth through the budget process, I'm ultimately servant to the community. And so when I'm asking for additional resources, sometimes that can be a challenge. And they say, well, our crime is really low. Why do we need more officers? Well, the thing is, the bottom line is, to train an officer to be out there, okay, you're talking about 6 months from the day you hire them to the day they're out there. Okay, I've got an officer, and that's if all of the stars are aligned. Okay, because there's gonna be gaps in training and things that occur. So I may hire somebody today, for instance, but there may not be another available academy class for 2 months. So in the meantime, this person's gotta sit, and you say, well, why do you hire them so early? Well, if I don't hire him or her, they may go to another agency, and I may lose that opportunity to have another awesome officer out there. Or I may have to settle for something that may be not as good, okay? So, you know, it's a very competitive market out there to make sure you get good qualified people. Unfortunately, people over the time have made some bad decisions, and it may disqualify them or put them in a secondary role maybe for a position in law enforcement. So we're all seeking that same professional, well-educated staff member to be a part of our team to make sure that we're delivering the services that we need to deliver. So that's kind of where our crime is. Most of our crime is theft related. If you follow us on Twitter, on Facebook, if you look at us on our internet, one of the campaigns we just rolled out yesterday is something called Hide It, Lock It, or Lose It. Because most of our crime is larceny. Almost 80% of our crime that we had this year was theft. Of that, 30% of that was actually theft from autos. Of that, many of those were from unlocked autos. Okay? So what you have is folks just checking doors and people leaving valuables in the vehicle. And we did a big press release. You can find that on our website, as well as our Facebook and Twitter. So one of our campaigns is to now make people more cognitive of what they're actually doing, making sure they don't leave valuables in open, out in the driveways and parking lots or whatever that might be, and or make sure they lock their doors. Okay, and just doing that, we could probably have a 20% reduction if that impact was felt completely. We'd have a 20% reduction in our overall crime, which is huge. All right, so even for our low numbers. So understanding that, also understand something else, that if you study things like Herman Goldstein's community-oriented policing models, back to the broken windows theory from the Herbert Keller days in Norfolk, up in Norfolk, Virginia, where they did a study called the broken windows theory. And the idea behind that is by having one broken window, it breeds other crimes. How they came up with this hypothesis. You know, there was a study the other day that many people don't know, the common person doesn't know what hypothesis means. I hope you guys, being in the education world, know what a hypothesis is. But nonetheless, the hypothesis was to park a vehicle out in a nice subdivision, a nice area of town, and leave it sitting there and see when it would become abused or a target for crime. But they let it sit there a couple of weeks, and of course I'm shortening and giving you the summarized version of this, but they let it sit there for a few weeks, and the vehicle was untouched. So what they did was they came back and they broke one window on the vehicle. And over time, the vehicle was completely demolished. Tires were taken off. It was, people took all kinds of stuff, graffiti. It just basically tore the vehicle apart. And what it did was that one broken window created other opportunities for crime. So when we talk about things like a campaign on not, like hiding your vehicles and hiding your valuables and locking your cars, things of that nature, you say, well, that's not really that big of a deal of crime, but the problem is it attracts other criminal elements to our community. So folks are concerned about, the big stuff happening. We all are, the burglaries, the people where you would feel, not that you wouldn't feel violated in your car, but if someone's going through your home, you certainly feel violated. That's like a piece of you has been taken from you, and it's a terrible, terrible feeling for those of you that have experienced it. If you've not, pray that you never do. But the point of it is that itself is something that can be, in some cases, prevented by fighting the small stuff, what I call the low-hanging fruit, dealing with that stuff. I can't prevent a lot of crimes by driving up and down a roadway in front of your house. I could drive back and forth all day, and there may be crime going on left and right inside that home. But there may be some impact that I can have by a few crime prevention tips, and that's just the kind of things we try to do to try to educate ourselves and the community. Another thing that we've been doing since 2004 is we operate under what we call a COMSTAT model. We call it our TRACS program, okay? And basically, it's just a basic problem-solving method or problem-solving tool. Many of you have probably in some of your classes heard of the SARA approach to problem solving, where you scan, you analyze, you develop your resources, and then you go back and you look at what you've done in the past again. So that's the same exact type of tool that we're using to make sure that we're paying attention to what's going on in our community. So we meet once a month. We invite agencies that border us. For instance, KSUPD comes, Ackworth comes, Cobb County comes. And we sit there and we talk about the things that are going on, where our hot spots are, for lack of a better term, or our crime trends, where are we finding our spikes. And the desire is so that we can position ourselves to make a difference in whatever spikes may be occurring out there. And that's something that we actively do. In fact, we're about to even take it up a little more in some of our responses on a new program that we'll be rolling out soon. What I hope to do as time goes on is to actually get into some predictive analysis work, where we can actually look at what's happened in the past to try and predict what areas may be affected in the future. And that's something that in 9.6 square miles, is which the city has, with 33,000 residents, you'd say, well, it's going to be hard because our numbers are so low there again. However, we will have to be communicating with our other agencies around us to make sure we're doing that in an accurate way. The only other thing I'd like to talk with you about before I open it up for questions, I'm actually doing better on time than I thought I would, is some of the issues that we're seeing and trending. Typically we've hired officers. I know when I came into it back in 1991 that I thought of law enforcement as the type of thing where I respond to a call, I go deal with whatever. If I had to lock someone up, I deal with that. I go on about my day, right? Well, times have changed. The wonderful world of electronics, the things that have given us all of our joys of being able to see a clear TV or having instant messaging or knowing what's going on worldwide, just like that, has also created a world of crime. And so we are working desperately to improve our abilities to both address both situations from a sexual nature. We have a lot of predators out there that are focusing their sexual deviancies on children. So that's one avenue. And then secondly is your financial crime, where people are roping, unfortunately, victims into situations where they're losing maybe small amounts individually, but collectively millions and millions of dollars. And now it's also affecting some of our companies and our other resources that help create and keep the balance in our communities. So that is something that personally and collectively in law enforcement that we're all dealing with and looking at to find opportunities to have some impacts in those types of situations and get the word out. An ounce of prevention, you've heard 1,000 times worth of pound of cure, and we do believe that from our scope as well. So I will kind of open it up for questions. I guess maybe even clear up some myths, individual to our department or more broadly from a general perspective of law enforcement. So I'll be glad to answer anything you guys have. Yes, sir.
Do you believe that the Kennesaw gun law has been or to what degree do you believe that's a factor for the low crime rate?
I think it does have an impact. I'm just not able to qualify that or quantify it. Do I think that, I definitely do think it has an impact. It's just hard to say, well,
yeah,
this crime occurred because I can tell you this, though, that we don't have an increase in crime because of gun ownership, and we have a very low number of accidental situations because of gun ownership, which is something that has been debated both at the federal level and the state level quite a bit. So, the impact there to go the opposite direction is not, we don't see evidence of that, I can tell you that. So you would say, well, a lot more guns, a lot more people with guns, there's going to be a lot more gun incidents, and there's not. Even some of the past murders we've had have some have included guns, but you know, I think it was 2 years ago, we actually had a father killed a son killed his father, stabbed him something like 80-something times. When I first came to work there in '04, there was a murder just a month prior, in July of 2004, and it was some roommates, and one beat the other one with some musical equipment, you know, like a stand for to hold your sheet music on. So, what I'm trying to say is, it's not creating more crime by having the guns. So I can factually give you that information. It's just that I can't really give you an answer as to what's been diverted because of gun ownership. But it is clear that it's almost as if we're in a bubble.
Right. Yeah. That's why a lot of people have that theory
Yeah.
that that's
So
what they
I know
control.
Ackworth shares some similar, you know, I guess crime stats. It's not that bad in Ackworth either. It's actually fairly good. Marietta's not too bad. Cobb County as a whole is not too bad, but it still does feel like we're in a bubble of sorts. So some of that I think is socio-economical as well. You know, some of it's zoning. I think zoning has a lot to do with it. You know, going after the right things. And I'll tell you this, back to the broken windows theory, you know, we have a fairly aggressive code enforcement type activity. The code enforcement officers actually work under the police department. So when things like high grass come up, we're dealing with that. So it doesn't give this impression to others that it's an unkept community. Yes.
I just wanted to ask, you said that the gun law was sort of a good word, but you're not actually checking. So what kind of statistics do you have as far as how many guns are in Kennesaw?
We don't have any.
So you don't really
We don't know. No.
All you really know is that we're in
And
Kennesaw.
I would venture to say, now I know there's been some changes in state law, which may have given some effect to it, but I can tell you that most of the people that move into Kennesaw that just end up there for whatever reason, not that they've chosen, they just kind of, okay, this looks like a good spot, let's get an apartment here or buy a house here. Especially folks that are, I would call somewhat transient. They live into the more rental community, they're there for a couple of years and then they move on to someplace else. Many of them don't even know the law exists. So it's hard to gauge. We don't have any knowledge of numbers.
Hear a little bit more about how socioeconomic stats in Kennesaw impact, the low.
Well, you know, it's not expensive to live in Kennesaw. I think the median, and I haven't looked at this in a while, but I wanted to say the last time I did look at it was around 150 to buy a home on average, and I think that's relatively doable for most people in this area. So I don't think it's you know, when I talk about social economics though and demographics, you know, currently across our country, I think we talked a little bit about this in the hall, is our coping skills with one another has been reduced because, you know, we don't have the front porches anymore. Everybody's living a busier lifestyle. Our form of communication is usually with a couple pair of thumbs or a keyboard. So we've not kept up with, you know, many neighbors don't even know one another anymore. So demographics is changing like that. And so when I speak of that, it's what it's talking about. When I'm talking about some of the zoning and social economic issues though, what I'm talking about is how well we keep up with our community. So when you're driving into an area, does it look, and a matter of fact, the city just passed a new ordinance on blight tax, or they're in the process of blight tax. I think they're either in the process, I think they had the first public hearing, they may have already passed the new ordinance. It's we're in the process or just happened. So basically what'll happen is for areas, properties that's left unattended for any great deal of time, and then it actually become a burden to the community, they're actually gonna get taxed as part of their property tax value, or property tax will actually go up. And they'll have to pay more money to the city, because the city then is incurring some costs. For example, we had on Main Street a home and a church that had been vacant for years and years and years and years. We finally were able to go in there and get rid of it, but prior to that, I was having to send city staff with community service workers and inmate labor out to cut the grass on this property, so that it did not, and in order to do that, I had to go in front of a judge to get permission to abate the property. Then, after that, we had to use city resources, fuel, gas, or fuel, city equipment, and staffing to go in there. Well, that's taxing to you, the taxpayer, and it's taxing to us to use resources for that. So by creating this blight tax of sorts, that type of thing can be recouped for that property as it's going. Historically, all we've been able to do is assign a lien to it and then get it back on the back end after a sale. But sometimes those sales don't happen, and over the last 3 to 5 years, things haven't been moving much in the market. But I think focus on making sure we keep up with the small things like that has helped with crime reduction. So when I speak of economic, social economic, that's kind of what I'm talking about, kind of an attitude of the community. Yes, ma'am.
So going on about like maybe implementing new taxes or whatever, I know there's like an old law, and it's been here since God knows forever, about how the city of Kennesaw doesn't want Kennesaw to really turn into a college town in the sense of Greek housing and having more than 2 unrelated people living together and so on and so forth. Because I know I live in a duplex with my roommate, and we had one of our friends stay with us for a week because he had just the lease on his house was just up, and he was in the middle of moving to a place in Canton, and we got a notification on our door saying that we basically were having a brothel at our house because our male friend was staying with us for a week until he moved into the house in Canton. So do you see that changing at all as Kennesaw grows?
I think it's actually a very tall tale that you've been hearing, a myth of sorts. And we hear this quite frequently from the campus, and I understand it. Even though it's 23 years since I've been in this business, it doesn't feel that long ago since I was on campus myself. So I will tell you that there is no law like you're talking about. The law that you're referring to is actually less strict than, or so I understand, is less strict than actually what the county has. And it's unrelated is very common to what is commonplace around the community at large. So there's nothing specific or more, I guess you could say more strict in Kennesaw than there is anywhere else. Ours are less restrictive, if not equal to. So I think it's actually 6 unrelated, if I'm not mistaken. And what you're speaking of at your residence was probably something more to do with the property that you live in. Your townhome community, you probably have some sort of covenants that you've agreed to live there, whether it be an apartment complex, a townhome community, or a residential neighborhood. Those types of things, maybe the notice that you got. That is up to them to enforce civilly. It has nothing to do with the city government. Many, many times covenants are confused with laws, and it's really not the case. As a matter of fact, I would go as far as saying that the city of Kennesaw has actually aggressively looked at more partnership opportunities, at least in the 10 years that I've been here, has looked for better partnerships, stronger partnerships with the campus itself and with the students. And you may be aware that we have actually, over the course of the last 2 years, had 2 privately owned student housing communities that have moved into the city limits, one being U Club and the other one being West 22. So we've actually appreciated it, and some of the downtown development that you see coming is somewhat geared towards not just the college life now, but beyond that. When you decide to go into your world of whatever work you're going to be doing, and you decide you're going to have a family or find a place to settle, we want that to be Kennesaw. So we want beyond just what you're experiencing now from student life to be greater than that. We want you to find ways to be here for the long haul.
Yeah, because I know I looked into it once we got the citation, and I know it's based on how large of the home you're living in, and we looked into it, and we could have 3 people in our home living together. And it was probably like a neighbor who like reported seeing a car that hadn't been there and was there being seen like consistently for a week or so. I mean, granted, we notified them what was going on, and unfortunately we had to like kick our friend out, and he had to like go to different couches. And so as long as we had addressed it, they weren't going to fine us or anything for it. But I just didn't, because I'm not a part of like this student like on campus or off campus, but still affiliated with KSU Housing. It's a completely different privately owned residence.
Now, I will tell you that some of the subdivisions where you have single dwelling homes, we have had complaints from people that live, neighbors, that have students live next to them, that people park their cars in the grass, they have trash everywhere, they never cut their grass, all of these things. But when we go deal with those from a government perspective, again, different than probably what you experienced from the owner's perspective of the property. What we deal with is when we go in there, we're dealing with those specific code violations. So if there's noise complaints, if there's loud parties, if there are, that may have underage drinking, for example, we're dealing with those issues and not necessarily trying to tell you, well, you've only got so many people that you're supposed to have in your house. Now, that may come to that, but again, it's a number that is very generally based and most commonly accepted by most communities in Metro Atlanta. It's not something that where Kennesaw has created these tighter restrictions to prevent you and your friends from living together and have somebody sleeping on your couch for a couple of nights till they find another place. That's not what it's designed to do. So, like I said, I had to go back and look at the ordinance, but I think it's actually 6 feet, because others from other communities have come in and pointed fingers at us and said, y'all need to make that tougher, because we don't want these kids living next to us, that kind of thing. So.
You're saying 6 people
Yeah.
live in a residence.
Right. And you
6
gotta check-
unrelated people?
Yeah, and you gotta
So
check
wonder
that
why you
on,
got that then.
on our ordinance. I don't have that in front of me, so.
Yeah.
It's either 4 or 6, but it's certainly not 2 or 3.
2 or 3. And you said it was from
Yeah.
the city of Kennesaw.
Yeah, like, I'm pretty sure our neighbor across the street, like, I guess turned us in or whatever, because
you
they
sure the
tend to
paper-
park in front of our house, in front of our mailbox where our friend was
Are you
parking.
sure the paperwork came from the city?
That's what my roommate said, cause her name is on the lease, and she's the one who had to address the situation.
I bet it's with your leasing company.
I got a
Well,
similar
it wasn't a
notice.
company, that, our lease isn't with a company, it's with a privately owned person,
Okay.
and it wasn't from her
Really?
at all. She doesn't even know about, that we had gotten the notification, period.
Oh, wow, okay. That's interesting.
I got a similar notice, and it was because our home was
I've heard of
zoned
people.
as a single family dwelling, and we had, just a few dudes from go to KSU
Right.
living in it, and so we actually had to have a couple of roommates move out, and it was a county ordinance.
That's what
And
county's a
theirs
little more
is if it's
strict.
a single family dwelling, is zoned as a single family dwelling, then you can't have 2 or more unrelated people.
You
So
may have
can
had
you explain
county.
that, city and county?
Well,
difference?
yeah, there's a completely different government entity. You've got county ordinances, which are local to areas of Cobb County that are not within city limits. And then you've got city ordinances that are directly related to those situations that are within our city limits specifically. So, like, in other words, the county, I can't enforce as a city of Kennesaw officer, I can't enforce a county ordinance.
So her thing could have been from Cobb County, saying.
Yes. Where do you live?
I live right, in the neighborhood where Shiloh and Frey meet, that Shell gas station right there, you keep going
You
straight.
going straight?
Yeah.
That's Cobb County.
The mystery is solved.
That's Cobb
So do
County,
you
'cause
think
my
that's gonna
assistant used to live back in
Do you think that's gonna change over time then?
No.
He's not Cobb County Popo.
No, I'm not, and I'm not being curt with that answer. I just tell you that and we have to, in this position, we have to balance the needs from both perspectives.
Mhm.
So what I tell the residents that have their wife or their husband and their children is that, there are reasonable expectations. And if you're hearing noises beyond 11 o'clock at night, you see cars parking all over the place, things that could be resulting from so many people living in one place. But there again, nothing that we have the ability to go in and change that. But I can affect whether or not you're parking on the grass, you know, whether you're violating other things that are actually impacting someone's quality of life.
Okay, so it's beyond Kennesaw, it's COG, that's.
Yes. In that case, it is COG.
If you own a house, you can't park on your own grass?
No, not in the city limits.
I just kinda figured,
Yeah.
it's my house, if I wanna.
Well, and that, there again, it goes back to the socioeconomic
Yeah,
question
yeah.
that she's got.
Yeah.
You know, if everything looks orderly, remains looking orderly, then you will have, it will attract less issues.
Homeowners associations do that too, I know.
They're actually a little more strict than city law is, or what most ordinances are.
I had another question about, narcotics violations, went from 118 to 207 from 2012 to 2013. Do you think that that's related as well, crimes of opportunity as well as maybe a boost in drugs having to do
Well,
with
it
larceny?
could be a multitude of situations. I will tell you that, you know, we've seen an increase, for example, in heroin use. And I think that is on the latter part of the precursor from the abuse of less illicit drugs, which is we commonly known as the oxys and that nature, the pain drugs. They're a lot more, I guess you could say, valuable. It costs a lot more money. So heroin's a lot cheaper. So we have seen an increase in uptick of that, and not only that, unfortunately, we've seen an increase in deaths from heroin use. So we have seen some increases in people getting caught. When you see that number of incidents go up, that's actually people catching. So in other words, it could come from a traffic stop. So there could be a lot of variables as to why that number has gone up, but I can't tell you most explicitly the one that worries me the most is the addiction of pain meds and the addiction to heroin. And both of them are really related. And you may have seen, if you pay attention to especially like some local and even some world news, there's a new drug now. It starts with a Z, and I think it's ZYOPHDYL or something like that. And I can't pronounce it, but it's actually one of the probably going to be the strongest pain drug that's out there right now. The concern is the diversion of that drug, not so much for the person that needs it, because it is extremely addictive and can harm you really, really quickly. So the diversion part being that it can be crushed and snorted very easily, and so the diversion meaning it can be used as an illicit drug as opposed to a prescription medication.
On that same question, have you seen any, like increase, I don't know, is there a drug court? Is there any increase in referrals to treatment? Or do you find that we're putting people in jail more? Or are there alternatives? Or, you know, how much latitude do you have? Things like
From
that.
the law enforcement perspective, we're extremely limited in our latitude. What we do see drug courts, and I do see where there are diversion programs that try to help those who are just those who possess or maybe user type situation. We don't even take a piece of the icing for those that are actually selling the stuff and where that's coming. Most of it's actually coming, it orients internationally. And there's a lot of money, there's a lot of people involved, and you really never cut down through the layers of the onion to get to what a lot of the root is. So that's a constant battle from that perspective, to make sure that we're doing everything we can from a proactive, preventive, and then if we have to, enforcement level to make sure we're addressing those issues.
One other question unrelated to that. I saw an article, you were talking about financial crimes, and I saw an article about Cobb County implementing some type of alert system when people come in and start messing with people's deeds. So they have some systems where, I guess there's been house theft somehow with deeds.
Called squatters.
Squatters, okay, all right. Is there anything that's going on with that, or is that even an
Fortunately,
issue
we've
out
not
here?
had, and I'm just gonna knock on some wood somewhere. We've really not had an issue in Kennesaw with that. We have had like just a couple of situations, but we went after them fairly aggressively. One of the things that we enjoy in Cobb County is a fairly aggressive DA's office. The district attorney is Vic Reynolds, and you think aggressive, you think of a guy that's not going to listen to hardships or anything, and it's quite the opposite. He's probably one of the easiest going men I've ever met in my life. He understands things, but if you come and you try to hurt someone else, or Cobb County is not the place to do it. Gang incidences, like we just had a big 3 or 4 people arrested under some gang acts. Probably one of the first that's been in this area. And it was funny to me to hear people say, "Well, I had gangs here." And I'm like, with your head buried in the sand. Every community has gangs, and it's not that we should just say okay to it, but at the same time, it's a reality of the world and a reality of life. And we had some instances, some violent crime incidents that occurred, and we were able to tie it to a group of people that turned out to be a gang. We were able to deal with that issue, and I will tell you, this district attorney is got his crosshairs on this issue, and he's brought in some experts, and they're going to try it to the fullest extent of the law. So I'm very proud that we've got somebody that is, that sees things from a multi-level perspective. You talk about some of the financial things, some of the white-collar crimes issues that are kind of a challenge for law enforcement to deal with, because we're geared towards going to answer the lights with, the calls with the blue lights going on. So we're not accustomed to sitting there on a computer. Now, maybe as we start hiring you guys that are the younger generations that are a little more accustomed to electronics and some of the ways that you work with electronics, maybe that'll be some changes over time. But I'm going to tell you, I just got back from National Academy up at FBI, and they're bringing in literally college-age students, you guys' age, to do intern programs with the FBI. You come through a week at the academy, you get oriented, and you go back out to the different areas, like from Atlanta or Birmingham or what have you. And there were like 50 or 60 young people there that was there while I was there, just for an orientation group. And so they're trying, not just locally, but on a broader perspective, on a national level, trying to focus on getting that element under the auspices of law enforcement so that we can really keep up.
Before our time's up, I thought we should ask a question about KSU's contribution to the crime rate in Kennesaw. Would you say that, KSU has been growing very exponentially in the past few years, and has Kennesaw State University has it had any effect at all in the crime? Have you had more students been arrested for certain kinds of crimes?
We've had students arrested for things like underage drinking and parties and things like that goes with the normal college life type atmosphere. But to say we've had a rise in crime just because of college students, I think would be an unfair depiction of that. With any population, and we were talking briefly about this before class, that with any population rise, your numbers coincidentally will go along with that. But that doesn't always mean your ratio does. For instance, when the gun law was passed, there were 5,000 people that lived in the city limits of Kennesaw. Now there's 33,000 people that live. So the ratios change. And so the thing you don't want to see is as population goes up, the ratio stays the same. If your population is going up and your ratio, your crimes of incidents only go up slightly, but your scope expands, I think you're doing a good job. I think that's a success, is what I'm saying. So, to be a person in government that says, "Oh no, we don't want no more people because that's just going to be more crime," that's not the belief I have. I believe people are good, and good people are good people, and bad people are bad people, or people that choose to do crime are bad. That type of thing. And you're naturally going to have any adjustment in population growth. You're going to have an adjustment in crime as well. And it's our focus to make sure that we as law-abiding citizens minimize those opportunities to commit crimes by doing some of the simple things like lock your doors of your house, lock your doors of your car, make sure you
you hide things or keep things out of public view. And, you know, do the very basic principles, not just live on the complacency that, oh man, there's no crime around here, we ain't got nothing to worry about, because there